I'm Stephen Beardsley in Berlin. Welcome to our program. EU leaders have gathered in Brussels for what's been anticipated as one of the most tense and divisive summits in the bloc's recent history. Top of the agenda is finding a way to continue funding Ukraine in its war against Russia. One of the main proposals has been whether to unlock more than 200 billion euros in frozen Russian assets as loans to Kyiv. Many EU governments, including Germany, are backing the plan. Italy and Belgium have reservations, while Hungary is against it. Among the concerns for some EU members is the legality of using the frozen funds, which are still Russia's under international law.
Roughly 300 billion euros of Russia's central bank reserves are frozen around the world. Most of that money is held by Euroclear, a financial depository based in the Belgian capital, Brussels. Euroclear has been reinvesting these assets, making billions in profits. The EU has been sending those profits to Ukraine. But the principle hasn't been touched because seizing sovereign assets is illegal under international law. But nearly 4 years into Russia's full-scale war, EU countries are struggling to keep funding Ukraine with their national budgets. Brussels' plan to use Russia's frozen assets to make a so-called reparations loan for Ukraine would see the Commission borrow cash balances from EU financial institutions holding immobilized Russian central bank assets. The Commission will then loan the money to Ukraine. The initial amount planned is 90 billion euros, but the loan can go up to 210 billion euros. As a safeguard for Euroclear and other institutions exposed to risk, EU governments will guarantee the loans to Ukraine, meaning they will have to step up and provide the money if Russia were to win a legal challenge. The EU maintains its proposal is not a confiscation of Russia's assets. Officials in Brussels say Moscow's claim on the money doesn't change. The EU's plan is based on a paper authored by this British campaigner.
Under international law, Russia owes war damages, also known as reparations, to Ukraine for its illegal invasion. I came up with the idea of a loan. And the core idea behind this loan is it's a loan that Ukraine only has to repay if Russia pays it war reparations.
Russia's central bank assets are frozen under sanctions the EU imposed on Moscow for invading Ukraine. These sanctions have to be renewed every 6 months. The EU has now frozen Russia's central bank assets indefinitely to get around Russia-friendly governments in the bloc that may support Moscow getting its money back. Using a special emergency procedure, the EU has blocked the assets until Russia compensates Ukraine for the damage caused during the war.
And our correspondent Jack Parrock is standing by in Brussels, where the discussion appears to be shifting. Jack, what can you tell us?
Yeah, we've just had some comments from EU officials that are telling us what's going on inside of the room, and it looks like the Belgian bloc on releasing these frozen assets is going to remain even after this summit. We understand that the discussions are now moving on to whether the European Union can raise collective debt to support Ukraine, at least in the short term, over the next few months, so that they can fund Ukraine and its economy, which by about March, April is meant to, face some real difficult problems if there isn't any liquidity going in there, while they then try and have the discussions over the frozen assets. That's what we're hearing from EU officials. It looks like the Belgians have dug their heels in and said that they just won't move on this. They haven't been able to get the assurances from the other EU countries that they would help them should Russia, in some post-war future, come knocking on their door and asking for that money back.
All right, so it sounds like the plan to use frozen Russian assets off the table in the short term. Why has this discussion been so difficult? We just heard that piece right there. Help us understand what has really been at the heart of this issue.
Yeah, well, it's that assurance that Belgium needs. All of this, most of that 200 billion is stuck here in Euroclear, the financial institution. And the Belgians, as a small country, if they had to give that money back without support from other EU countries, it would have massive economic detrimental effects on the Belgian budget. Now, this is a very complicated discussion in and of itself and has been legally very complicated. But now moving on to the discussion of raising collective debt in the European Union, that is extremely complicated as well. This sort of over-bridging measure to try and fund Ukraine by allowing the European Union's institutions to go and raise money on international markets. It has been done. It's important to say it was done in the COVID-19 pandemic, but that was to support EU citizens themselves. To go out and do it, to raise funds for Ukraine, that would probably be politically very complicated. Certain countries, Hungary, the Czechs, for instance, they might also not be on board with this. The officials were saying it could be possible. We'll have to wait and see. It looks like a long night still ahead.
I remember that discussion from the pandemic, very difficult at the time. Is there any chance that this could end without some kind of resolution? How important is it for these member nations to find some sort of solution?
Well, very important. We heard the Polish Prime Minister a bit earlier on saying, if it's not money today, it will be blood later on. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states are very concerned that this isn't only about Ukraine, that Russia would then try and go further west into countries like Poland, like Lithuania, like Estonia, etc. And that's what they're worried about, and why that they believe this is so existential, why they believe funding Ukraine is so important for the European Union. How that's going to happen still remains unclear. The leaders are saying, the European Council President Antonio Costa said they are never leaving until a solution is found. So we stay here and wait to see what happens.
All right, Jack Parrock in Brussels. Jack, many thanks.
Benjamin Hilgenstock is the director of the Center for Geoeconomics and Resilience at the Kyiv School of Economics. Welcome to DW. Now, Ukraine wants this loan backed by Russia's frozen assets to fill a massive hole in its budget. What would happen if it didn't get these funds?
Ultimately, early on next year in 2026, Ukraine would no longer be able to pay for its defense expenditures and for other critical spending, such as on social benefits to vulnerable populations. That wouldn't mean that the war ends, but it would mean that more people would die. So it is very urgently needed that the EU comes to a decision on this proposed reparations loan mechanism.
What would a no-deal scenario mean for the EU?
Well, I think German Chancellor Merz has correctly pointed out that this is really a test of the EU's ability to act. What Europe is facing, what the continent is facing, is an existential threat to its peace and prosperity stemming from Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And if the EU proves to be unable to support Ukraine financially, this will definitely come back to haunt us here in Europe when Russia turns its eye elsewhere.
Seizing sovereign assets, though, and this is no minor detail, is illegal under international law. Is that why there is so much trepidation about it?
So first of all, I would dispute the statement that seizing sovereign assets is against international law. However, most importantly, what we're talking about here in the case of the reparations loan mechanism is definitely not confiscation. The mechanism is designed specifically to avoid this problem. And there is a relatively easy way to test this hypothesis by asking what would happen should the EU decide to revert the immobilization decision. At that time, the Russian central bank would come to Euroclear and other banks in Europe and demand its money back. And these banks would actually be obliged to give the CBR its money back. If this were expropriation, then this obviously would not be possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, Russia has threatened and to some extent already announced legal action. From what I'm hearing, you think that this plan would hold up if challenged in court?
So Russia always threatens all sorts of things to make us afraid and make sure that we do not take decisive action to support Ukraine and to actually punish Russia for its illegal invasion of a neighboring country. Now, the most important avenue that is available to Russia is international investment arbitration, not the kind of kangaroo court proceedings that Russia has now started in Moscow arbitration. Most experts believe that Russia would not win an international investment arbitration case against Belgium because it basically caused the situation itself by blatantly violating the most important principles of international law, by invading a neighboring country.
Are there then other ways in which Russia could retaliate?
So I think the most important thing that people think about is that Russia could retaliate by seizing the assets of foreign companies in Russia. That is certainly possible. However, it is important to acknowledge that Russia has been doing this for basically 4 years whenever it sees fit and needs this money. So this is happening anyway. It is also blatantly illegal. So companies would be able to themselves initiate investment arbitration cases against Russia. Most importantly, however, the alternative to this reparations loan is issuing debt, either by the EU or by individual EU member states to support Ukraine. And that would basically mean we are socializing the bad business decisions by companies to do business in Russia. And I don't think that is something that we should even consider.
The Trump administration has reportedly been working behind the scenes to encourage some European governments to reject this plan. Why are we seeing this now? What's in it for Donald Trump?
So it's not entirely clear what the position of the US administration actually is here, and that's not unusual for this administration. Basically, I think Donald Trump or some people in his administration would like to use this immobilized money as a bargaining chip in peace negotiations. It was infamously part of the 28-point so-called peace plan that emerged a couple of weeks ago. And of course, if the EU uses this money to extend a loan to Ukraine, then that is no longer possible. However, since the EU, as you pointed out earlier, already changed the way in which it immobilizes these assets by now basically indefinitely freezing them, the issue is basically already off the table.
Belgium wants the European Commission to explore alternative options to finance Ukraine. What other options are on the table?
There's basically only one, which is, as I said before, debt issuance either by the European Union or by individual EU member states. This is being floated by Belgium. That is correct. There are several governments in the European Union that are quite strongly against this. Many countries actually do not have the fiscal space to borrow this much money. Think about France or other countries. So I don't think this is a realistic option, but it is the one that is being floated right now.
I want to look beyond Ukraine before we let you go. Does this debate set a precedent for how future wars might be financed? In other words, are we witnessing the birth of a new model of wartime economic deterrence?
I think this is a very exceptional case because there aren't many countries that have this kind of amount of foreign assets that could be immobilized or used for these kind of purposes. Of course, we are setting a precedent insofar as we're holding an aggressor accountable in this way. This has not been done before at this scale, but the immobilization itself was already kind of setting a new precedent in this regard.
Do you think this deal will ultimately go through?
That is a very good question. I very much hope so. There is a tremendous sense of urgency. The pressure on Belgium and some of the other countries is definitely increasing by the minute. Kaja Kallas has said, and von der Leyen as well, that the European leaders are basically not going to leave until they have a deal, either on the reparations loan or an alternative scheme. And I think that is actually what the situation requires. This is a dramatic challenge for Europe that we now need to live up to.
Benjamin Hilgenstock from the Center for Geoeconomics and Resilience at the Kyiv School of Economics. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Let's keep talking about this and bring in Anna Matveeva. She's a senior visiting research fellow at the Russia Institute at King's College London. Welcome to DW. Tell us, how is the Kremlin spinning the EU's asset debate at home?
There are two issues here. One is that the Kremlin is showing that, look, there is a sign of the European impotence. They cannot do better rather than just steal our assets. They are running out of money. They are running out of capacity. So the only thing which they can resort is actually our body. The other thing which they are also saying that we were thinking that we're joining the civilized Europe, that we're joining the civilized world, which works with norms and rules, and private property is safe, it's rule-based order. None of that actually holds water. All rules can be bent towards politics of the moment, whatever is politically expedient. So we have put our trust into them, and that's what we got in return.
Russia has already threatened massive retaliatory measures. What tools does Moscow really have to be able to punch back?
There are three things. They have assets of the European states, Italy, Austria, Switzerland, to some extent Belgium, they are, and Germany, of course, they are all quite exposed. So seizure of Western European assets in Russia is a very realistic option. The other thing is that they are going to start all sorts of legal battles all over Europe, all over courts, which will be costly and unpleasant, which will target Belgium. It would be bogged down in prosecutions, proceedings. Sometimes Russia would win, sometimes it would lose, but it would turn really very ugly. And the other thing is their publicity stunt. This message which Russia projects to the rest of the world: look, do not trust these institutions. You thought that they have some kind of credibility behind them, but that's what they are capable of. So if you are prudent, think twice whether you want to put your money into them.
You mentioned all these countries that might become targets of Russian retaliation. Would you expect this move, if it actually were to materialize, to erode confidence in Europe as a safe financial hub?
I think the damage has already done. I don't think that the actual decision whether to get Russian assets or not would be a game changer. I would say that the fact that we came to that point, that it is becoming quite possible to do it, already sends a message to other important players, India, China, Gulf states, African nations. They will all start thinking, well, okay, even Russia managed to wriggle out of this situation for now, but this is now actually a possibility, something which we have not thought would be the remit of the possible. So yes, this message has been already sent.
Mm-hmm. Russia is showing defiance, but really, how nervous are they about the prospect of this?
Well, that's difficult to say, because on one hand, they haven't got access to these assets already for 4 years. So in that sense, what has changed? But they are also kind of mindful of a reaction of President Trump, because he's not in unison with Europe on that. He thinks that these assets are a part of his plan, and the Europeans are derailing his plan, which is not something which he will take lightly. He also thinks that these assets are part of a package, and there is a kind of bargaining chip in it. So if the assets are seized now and used to arm Ukraine, that option of using them as a leverage against Moscow would be kind of to create a win-win situation, that Russia would sort of save face, but on the other hand, Ukraine would get money for reconstruction and damages. That which Trump envisaged, that opportunity would be lost. And I'm not sure that that would be something which he would take very lightly.
Anna Matveeva, Senior Visiting Research Fellow at the Russia Institute at King's College London. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.